He said he'd be out by the end of the year. He only lasted until the end of the day. The Prime Minister's top aide, Dominic Cummings, has packed up his things and gone. It came after days of chaos sparked by the resignation of his right-hand man, Lee Cain. Now the government has lost two of its most powerful figures in as many days. So are things falling apart in Downing Street? Ministers were playing it down today.
He wrote in January that he was looking to leave at the end of the year, which is when Brexit and also the transition period will be over. And he had one or two other things that he wanted to get achieved. I'm not surprised that he feels that quite a lot of his work is done, but his ideas and energy, I'm sure, will be missed.
Before he entered Number 10, he was known as the man who won the Brexit referendum as head of the campaign group Vote Leave.
What are we doing? Taking back control!
But more recently, the Prime Minister's top advisor became the top story when it was alleged that he broke the very lockdown rules he helped to create.
We drove for roughly half an hour and ended up on the outskirts of Barnard Castle town,
making him the subject of headlines and punchlines.
Is this the way to Barnard Castle? You see, my vision's a bit of a hassle.
Is it one rule for you, Mr. Cummings, and another rule for everybody else?
A self-styled anti-establishment figure, he's often been at odds with the media, the civil service and even the Tory party. It was always going to be tricky to have someone with little love for the Conservative Party installed here at the heart of a Conservative government. But whilst Dominic Cummings was the man who could win elections with his magic slogans, take back control, get Brexit done, he was tolerated by the Tory establishment. But after a major public backlash over his lockdown trip to Barnard Castle and a wider wave of criticism over the government's handling of the pandemic, that tolerance has now come to an end.
I think he has been a liability, and it's not, so far as I'm concerned, before time. But look, the real thing that matters is that we have a national situation, the most dangerous since the Second World War, the pandemic. And we also have the need to conclude our negotiations with the European Union. And frankly, the sooner that Mr. Cummings is out of the way and we get some heavyweights in to do a man's job, the better.
But love him or loathe him, most agree that he has shaped Boris Johnson's first year of government in his own image. So what can we expect now from the Prime Minister?
The reason why somebody like Dominic Cummings has had so much sway within the government is because Boris Johnson doesn't really know what he wants to do. Ultimately, the stuff that was said and written about me was a lot of it nonsense because my boss, Tony Blair, knew what he was doing. A lot of the stuff said about Cummings is not nonsense, is because he has filled a gap, if you like, or filled a vacuum that's created by Johnson. So in the end, this is an opportunity for him to show whether he's actually capable of doing the job.
One immediate challenge could be a wave of resignations as Vote Leave loyalists follow their leader out of Number 10.
I think a lot of people will be considering their position at the moment. There's a lot of personal loyalty to Dominic Cummings, but there's also perhaps an opportunity to change the culture of Downing Street, which so many people, so many MPs in my party feel isn't working.
Tonight, Downing Street has said that Dominic Cummings will continue to work until mid-December. But if these images tell us anything, it's that his influence is already over.
Well, earlier I spoke to the former Justice Secretary David Gauke and to Caroline Slocock, who served as Private Secretary to Margaret Thatcher. I began by asking her what she made of Dominic Cummings.
Wrongheaded in the sense that I think he's not been working in a way that's getting the best out of government. You know, you can be as clever as you like, but if you can't actually deliver anything, then it's all wasted. And I think his particular style, which is, you know, taken a lot of power on himself and taken a lot of power away from others, including ministers and civil servants, is not one that's going to deliver real change and is disastrous probably in a crisis like the one that we've just been experiencing.
I mean, he obviously rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way, so there'll be no shortage of people coming out to say he was no good. Is that a fair assessment of his time in government?
Well, I just think that he's not the man for the job now. He might have been the man for campaigning for Brexit. He was obviously very successful at that, but I just don't think he has the skills to ensure that the government does what it actually wants to do and to work with the civil service effectively.
David Gauke, what was your take on Dominic Cummings? I mean, obviously you disagreed with him on Brexit, but looking at him as a policy man, as a man who wanted to change the country, how do you assess him?
I think you have to acknowledge that he's got an extraordinary record as a campaigner, both in terms of the EU referendum in 2016 and the general election in 2019. So he's been very, very successful in terms of crafting a message, setting out dividing lines, having an electoral strategy. I think in terms of achievements in office, that's harder to identify. If you look at the things that he sort of set himself in terms of civil service reform, not really made very much progress on that. In terms of sort of levelling up, not very much progress on that. Or to be fair, the whole pandemic issue has rather sort of swept away anything else. And of course, he is personally responsible for damaging the messaging that the government had about complying with the rules and restrictions.
Caroline Slocock, you've seen them all, haven't you? I mean, do politicians always get as reliant as Boris Johnson did on Dominic Cummings?
Well, I think it's very important to have a team around you in number 10 who work well with you, and you simply cannot function without them. But it's also very important that a Prime Minister is in charge, that they have a clear vision and that they're on the details so that they can make really good decisions. And I think the issue with Dominic Cummings is not so much Dominic Cummings as actually the Prime Minister, that he is a weak Prime Minister. He's not engaged with the detail in the way that someone like Margaret Thatcher was. And I think it's ironic that Boris Johnson, who came in on a ticket of taking back control and really listening to people, particularly in the north, and levelling up, has created a government which is becoming almost unable to communicate effectively with people on the ground.
David Gauke, when Caroline Slocock was working for Margaret Thatcher, people used to joke about the cabinet being vegetables. And those jokes have come back under Boris Johnson, haven't they? That special advisors have become more powerful than cabinet ministers. Now, if, as Caroline suggests, you start devolving power, do you think Boris Johnson has capable people around him in the cabinet, or who could be put in the cabinet, who could take up the reins?
Well, I think it's certainly the case, as everything that you hear about the way that Whitehall works at the moment, it is that cabinet ministers don't have the confidence to make their own decisions. That the first question they're always asking is, what do number 10 think about this? And I think Caroline's right. You can't run a government entirely on that basis. There's just too much to do to believe that a small number of people in the centre can control everything.
And finally, Caroline Slocock, I mean, is it possible, do you think, for prime ministers to so radically change the way they govern, the way you suggest should happen? I mean, does a leopard change its spots?
Well, we have one of the most centralised governments in Europe. So I think it's definitely possible for countries to be run in a different way. And I think if he's serious about the levelling up agenda, then that's actually what he has to do, has to devolve more power to people, including at community level. And certainly he has to operate a different style of government.
Caroline Slocock, David Gauke, thank you both very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And Liz Bates joins us again live from Westminster. Liz.
Yes, I think it's fair to say that Downing Street has, for the last couple of days, been in a state of confusion and chaos, and tonight is no exception. It was only a few hours ago that we heard that Dominic Cummings was quitting his job with immediate effect. And then we saw those images of him with all of his belongings in boxes, leaving number 10, clearly with no intention to return. Then, around an hour later, Downing Street starting to insist that Dominic Cummings and his right-hand man, Lee Cain, who himself quit a couple of days ago, would continue to work for the Prime Minister and number 10 until mid-December. So clearly some kind of battle going on behind the scenes as to whether the pair are going to be forced to work out a sort of notice period. I think what it does show us, though, is that tensions have clearly been building happening behind the scenes, and tonight they are spilling over out into the public domain. I think what we do know, though, with certainty tonight is that the reign of Dominic Cummings at number 10 is over.